tonight our topic is the time period from Noah to Abram. And so we're looking at the end of Genesis 9 and then chapters 10 and 11, from Noah to Abram. Let's learn a little bit about some of the content of those chapters. Genesis chapter 9, the end of the chapter, Noah, after they exit the ark, we already talked about, the first thing he did was build an altar. And so after the flood has subsided, Noah and his family are out on the land and they're starting over. Noah grows some grapes. And he makes some wine from those grapes. And he gets drunk. And Ham, his three sons, Ham and Shem and Japheth. Ham sees his father's nakedness. And then he points out his father's nakedness to his brothers. His brothers walk backward and take some sort of covering, blanket or something, and cover Noah so that his nakedness is not seen, so that his nakedness is covered. When Noah wakes up from his drunkenness and realizes what has happened, he curses the seed of Ham while blessing Shem and Japheth for their righteous actions. Now, Noah curses, we lack specifics on what the exact nature of Ham's offense is. Different commentators will say that Ham did different levels of things. At the very least, his sin, or what he did that was not right, was not to see the father's nakedness, but what he did with that, which was to point it out to the brothers. He did not come and cover him. He did not make things right, but instead he took what was wrong and made more of it. So at the very least, he did that. Whereas the brothers did the opposite and they covered. But many commentators believe that there was more going on there than simply seeing the nakedness, that there may have been some, and we won't go into what, but more sinister things, thoughts, and maybe even actions going on there. Noah curses Canaan, Ham's son. Interesting that the curse is on Canaan, not on Ham, and we'll say more about that. Now, maybe there was more to the curse that was not listed in the Bible, but the curse is on Canaan, the son of Ham, not on Ham himself. One commentator, might have been more than one, says that it's possible that because God blessed the three sons of Noah, that Noah could not curse what God had already blessed. That was one option. But here's a very unfortunate doctrine that was built off of this idea, this verse that Noah cursed Canaan. By the way, let's go to that if we can. Let's go to that verse. Since I don't have it in front of me, I want to just make sure that we get this, because cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants he shall be to his brethren. Okay, a servant of servants he shall be to his brethren. So Canaan is going to serve his brothers and his other relatives. Now, the doctrine that was built off of this, which is not a good doctrine, it's a repulsive doctrine, is the doctrine of the Bible affirming the idea of slavery. Because Ham's descendants, some of Ham's descendants, become the African nations. And so this idea that Ham's descendants serve the other descendants of Shem and Japheth. Now, I want to quote from John Walton on this, because I think he summarizes it well of why that doctrine is not biblical. He says it this way: for centuries, the curse of Canaan was one of the principal passages used to justify slavery. It was claimed that Ham was the forefather of the African race and that their slavery was thereby biblically mandated because of the curse. Both elements in this contention are fatally flawed. Number one, There are few families from the line of Ham that eventuate in dark-skinned peoples, and none from the line of Canaan. So there's a lot of descendants of Ham, only some of them become dark-skinned, and the ones that are dark-skinned don't come from Canaan. They come from the other children of Ham. And again, the curse is on Canaan, not on Ham. There is therefore no line of descent, again, Walton is saying this, there's therefore no line of descent connecting Ham or the curse on Canaan to dark-skinned Africans. Point 2, a curse does not create a mandate. It is something for God to carry out, a curse, not humans, though he may use humans as his instruments. This is Walton still talking. I do not know anyone who cultivates weeds just so the curse on the ground will remain reality. The final point would be found in the reminder that this is Noah's curse, not God's. Noah pronounced the curse on Canaan. It was not God saying this is a curse and here's why. So the idea that this is somehow a biblical mandate or support for slavery is totally false. Going into Genesis chapter 10 now, we get the so-called Table of Nations. This is another genealogical record. Now, I said this in our first genealogical record back in Genesis 4 and 5, and I'm saying it again, and I'll probably say it every time we get one of these things. To me, the key takeaway on these genealogies is that it's real. When you have this list of this person, fathered this person, fathered this person, fathered this person, why would you write that if it wasn't so? If you were making up a story, that's an awful, you are the worst storyteller in the world. I mean, how dry and boring is it to read through the begats? It's boring and dry. But they're there for many reasons. One is God seems to have an affinity for lineage. There's something there that is important to him. Our heritage and our lineage and our family trees, for some reason, are important to God, it seems. But more important to me in this is it's real. We can see who came from whom all the way down. And it's important for establishing Jesus' family tree. His messianic, it eventually becomes messianic. We're not to the messianic phase yet. Well, we don't know what a Messiah is yet in Genesis chapter 10. But all the way through, these family trees show that these are real people living real lives. And it's not just a made-up story. It's not a fable. Now, a couple other things related to the Table of Nations and Genesis 10. There are 70 names. Now, this is not accidental because the author doesn't actually include every name. So he includes certain names, and he doesn't include other names, and there's different amounts of names from different generations. So he's really putting this together, the idea that he had 70 and not 71 and not 69 was on purpose. 70 represents completeness. So there was something in the choices that the author made to include these 70 and not more and not fewer that has some sort of significance. Now, let's take a look at a graphic here. We have the three major nation groups, the three sons of Noah. They begin to spread out, their descendants begin to spread out roughly with Shem in the blue circle in southern Asia and the middle, what we call the Middle East and South Asia, with Japheth up into Europe and also over to Asia. I'll say more about that in just a second. And with Ham going down into the Canaan land. Canaan goes to Canaan, and down into Africa. Now, I said Asia, East Asia, okay? Likely that Japheth is the father of the East Asian peoples, but it doesn't really get into that in the Bible. The Bible does not, in Genesis 10, specifically try to account for every people group. It is interested in the people groups that would have been near and around and had some impact on the people of God, the Israelites. So Genesis 10 does not try to account for every single people group that there is on planet Earth. All right, now, let me give you a few of the key names of these peoples, because we see them as we go through the Bible story, interacting with the Israelites quite a bit. And it's interesting to when you read these names, oh, the Israelites fought against this group. Well, who in the world is that group? Well, a lot of them come from this. Some of them come from other parts of the Bible, but a lot of them come from Genesis 10. Listen to some of these names, and they'll sound familiar. The Canaanites. Canaan was the father of Sidon, as well as the Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, Girgashites, Hivites, Arkites, Sinites, Arvadites, Zemarites, Hamathites. The borders, let me stop right there. A lot of those names you remember from Israel fought against such and such in the promised land, right? They were supposed to drive out all those peoples. All those peoples came from Canaan. Okay. The borders of the Canaanite clans, I'm reading right from Genesis 10 now, reached Sodom and Gomorrah. We know those two towns, right? And so that was kind of the southern boundary there of where those people groups stretched out to. Now, totally different family here, still under Ham. Cush. Cush was son of Ham, was the father of Nimrod. Now, there's a little piece here in Genesis 10 about Nimrod. Most of it is just, here's this person. But Nimrod has some story to him. Nimrod means mighty hunter. It is said that he was essentially a king. He had 4 centers of his kingdom, which were in Shinar. More about Shinar in just a minute. One of the kingdoms was Babylon. There were 3 others listed, but this is in the region of Shinar. This would be modern-day Iraq. He also built Nineveh in Assyria. We know about that from later stories in the Bible. He was perhaps the king and ringleader of the Tower of Babel story, although there's no direct connection to that. Now, I'm going to go ahead and get into the Tower of Babel. We're going into chapter 11 now. One more thing in chapter 10, it says that the earth was divided in the time of Peleg. Okay, Peleg is one of the sons of Shem. In fact, he's the great-great-grandson of Shem. The earth was divided in the time of Peleg. Now, that most likely is referring to the dividing of the languages, the scattering of the people and the dividing of the languages. In other words, Tower of Babel was in the time of Peleg. So likely, Tower of Babel is in the time of Peleg, possibly in the time of Nimrod as well. Now, Genesis 11, Tower of Babel. Now, I'm going to pause right here. Sam, I'm going to pause right here, okay, because I forgot to do something at the beginning. I'm going to come right back to this, okay? Our exercise today has to do with the timeline again. But it took us a lot of time to deal with the timeline last time. So I thought I would do the timeline in a little bit different way. I've already kind of circled and given some commentary here on what I want you to see. Okay? So what I'm going to do for the exercise is I'm going to pass this around while I'm talking. I meant to do that at the beginning. But I just want you to take a minute to look and see what I've circled and commented here, and then just pass it to the next person, all right? So the exercise will be just on an ongoing basis throughout the, good luck with that, it's quite large, okay? Throughout the talk, okay? Now, when we get to the actual exercise part, we'll just do our community group talk, okay? But let that kind of circulate. Take your time, but also don't hog it, all right? All right. All right, we're back. So chapter 11 of Genesis, the beginning of it has the Tower of Babel account. Okay, so what's the Tower of Babel account? Here we go. The whole earth had one language, and the men moved eastward and found a plain in Shinar. I'm going to make a point about that in just a second, and settled there. They said, let's make a city with a tower to reach the heavens, and let's make a name for ourselves so we won't be scattered. Now, scattered means destroyed or disunified or split up or decommunitized. In other words, they wanted the protection of being together. They didn't want their city to be scattered. Now, the irony in their two desires, one is, again, to make a name for themselves also, but to make a tower that's tall enough that it'll reach to the heavens and to not be scattered. The irony is, God has to come down to see them, so their tower wasn't tall enough. And two, God scatters them. So the very thing that they were trying to not do was the thing that God did because of this making of the tower. Now, I said that I wanted to say something here about Shinar. For a long time, the idea of the story of the Tower of Babel was one of many stories in the Bible that was kind of dismissed as, well, we have no evidence for that, so therefore it didn't happen. Okay? The secular world would be quick to dismiss this until an archaeological excavation several years back, over a century now, uncovered many cuneiform tablets which had the word Shinar several times in various pronunciations. And so these cuneiform tablets that they uncovered in this archaeological excavation proved that there was a place called Shinar. And so the point that the people who didn't believe the Tower of Babel story would make is, we've never heard of a place called Shinar. That's a made-up place. Well, then they uncovered these old writings that were ancient, that were back in that time, that mentioned this place called Shinar. So this plain of Shinar, where these kingdoms were and where the Tower of Babel was, okay, it was a real place. Okay, the Tower of Babel would have looked something like this. It is what is called a ziggurat, Ziggurat. These were popular architectural designs back in that day and in that region, okay? They were, as you can tell from the picture, in layers. There's a big fat bottom layer, and on top of that sits a skinnier layer, and on top of that sits a skinnier layer. They are pyramid-ish shaped, but they're not pyramids. And the major difference between the pyramid and the ziggurat is that the pyramid is hollow on the inside because it's housing something. But the ziggurat is actually enclosed. There's no inside. It is filled up with dirt. In other words, it's very strong and not likely to blow over. But it has, as its feature ingredient there, I don't know how well you can see that. I think we can see it pretty well. Stairways that go up. Okay, now, let's get a couple things here on some possible interpretations of this Tower of Babel, okay? One of the phrases there is they say, the people of Babel say, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." Some have argued that this baking of the bricks was a new technique which made the bricks take on some properties of quartz crystals, which would allow for this tower to essentially serve as sort of a radio antenna. The purpose being to signal and be able to communicate with gods with a small g. In other words, demons. Okay? Now, I think it's more likely, well, here's what we know, is that these stairways, these staircases were a key feature. And I think it's more likely that the major purpose and the major reason for building the tower up to the heavens, was to have a staircase, a stairway for the gods, in other words, for demonic realm, to come back and forth, to interact and commune with the people. Now, I always, when I was a kid, thinking about the story of the Tower of Babel, for some, when you're a kid, you don't quite have everything quite right. I always thought it was a weird piece to the story that they're trying to build a tower and get to God. And God said they'll be able to do whatever they want to do if they set their mind to it because they're in unity and they have one language, right? And I'm thinking, okay, how could you actually build a tower? Does God mean that literally? And get to God? Well, now I would think about that differently. They weren't trying to get to God. They were trying to get to the gods. That's a totally different line of thinking. And they could have done it. In other words, if you want to, in your heart, get to the gods with a small g, if you want to give yourself over to demonic forces, they will be more than happy to oblige. And so God is saying, if they're in agreement here and they want to build this tower and they want to begin to interact with the spirit world, not his capital S spirit world, but the spirit world, they would have been successful. And so what did he do? He came and he said, we're not going to have any of this. Okay? And he confused their languages. And so this is the beginning of different languages. And then he scattered them. And so we have the scattering of the people, beginning all the different nations with different languages, different ethnicities, and so forth. All right. The stairway here is reminiscent, this idea of the demons coming up and down this stairway is reminiscent of Jacob's ladder, where the angels come up and down the ladder. But Jacob's ladder is the good version, and this ziggurat, the Tower of Babel, would be sort of the evil antithesis to Jacob's ladder. Okay, when we wrap up the chapter 11, we get another genealogy from Shem to Abram. And at the very tail end of that genealogy from Shem to Abram, we get Terah, Terah, and his descendants. Terah's father is Nahor. And I want to point out when there's two of these people, because that can be confusing. Terah's father is Nahor. Terah's sons are Abram and Haran and Nahor. So, like if you say, well, we're going to name our son after his grandfather. Okay, there are two Nahors. One, the father of Terah, and the other, the son of Terah. Now, there are three sons listed of Terah, one being Abram, the other two being Nahor and Haran. Later on, we learned that Sarai was the daughter of Terah, but by a different mother than Abram has. So, in other words, the half-sister. Abram and Sarai become married, and then Haran fathers two children, Lot and Milcah. And so we had a question earlier on. Lot is the son of Haran. Haran is the brother of Abram. So Lot is the what? Nephew of Abram. Okay. Milcah, who is Haran's daughter, marries Nahor, which is her uncle. All right. And the family tree continues there, but that's enough for us for tonight. All right. I did say from Shem to Abram, right? The descendants of Noah, from Noah to Abram, getting to Abram comes through Shem, not Japheth and not Ham. All right? So that's Genesis 9, the end of Genesis 9 through 11. In the second look segment tonight, I want to go to Acts chapter 2. Because we can think of Acts chapter 2, if Jacob's ladder, if the ziggurat is the evil antithesis of Jacob's ladder, then Babel is the evil antithesis in terms of the separation of languages, the evil antithesis of Acts chapter 2. Let's read Acts chapter 2, and I just want to make a couple points here of how they parallel the Tower of Babel story. Chapter 2 of Acts, when the day of Pentecost had arrived, they were all together in one place. Suddenly a sound like that of a violent rushing wind came from heaven, and it filled the whole house where they were staying. They saw tongues like flames of fire that separated and rested on each one of them. Then they were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in different tongues as the Spirit enabled them. Now there were Jews staying in Jerusalem, devout people from every nation under heaven. When this sound occurred, a crowd came together and was confused because each one heard them speaking in his own language. They were astounded and amazed, saying, "Look, aren't all these who are speaking Galileans? How is it that each of us can hear them in our own native language? Parthians, Medes, Elamites, etc., etc., etc." Down to verse 11, Cretans and Arabs. We hear them declaring the magnificent acts of God in our own tongues. They were all astounded and perplexed, saying to one another, "What does this mean?" Well, one of the things that it meant was that the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, as well as his ascension and then his pouring out of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost, means that he once and for all solved the problem of communication that started in Tower of Babel. There was one language, and God confused the languages so that we have different languages and we don't understand each other unless we learn our language. But at Pentecost, with this gift of tongues that was poured out, people began to speak not knowing that they were speaking the language of that person. And so where there were many languages from one language, now there is one language from many languages. And as Jesus likes to do, he brings it all back. All right? So look at a couple of specific tie-ins here. Verse 5 of Acts 2, devout men from every nation under heaven is the wording there. Devout men from every nation under heaven. Okay? In Genesis 11, every nation was created and scattered. So in Genesis 11, 10 and 11, every nation was created. In Genesis 11, every nation was scattered. In verse 5 of Acts 2, devout men from every nation come back together. Every nation under heaven. In verse 11 of Acts chapter 2, they say, we hear them speaking in our own tongues the wonderful works of God. So in verse 11 of Acts 2, many languages were understood as one. They could understand each other. In Genesis 11, one language became many languages. The takeaway, I think, from the idea of the one language, many languages, one language is this, I think. God said of the people that were building the Tower of Babel, nothing they propose to do will be withheld from them because they were so unified because of their one language and one heart and mind. Since Pentecost, we, the church, have the opportunity to be of one heart and one mind and one language, as it were, and nothing we propose to do will be withheld from us. That becomes now our application phase for tonight. When we as Christians are of one mind, one heart, one language, one mission, one purpose, there's nothing we can't attain. Read Ephesians 4, 1 through 6 aloud in your group, and let's take some time to pray for unity in the church. Leave space to ask the Lord if there are any areas where you are in disunity with a brother or sister, and repent if you need to. So tonight's application, it's not a discussion, it's a prayer time. So we'll read Ephesians 4, 1 through 6. We'll pray about unity in the church, and then we'll leave space for us to ask the Lord, is there anything in my heart? Is there any place in my heart where I am in disunity with others in the church? And if there is, if God reveals that to you, you repent of that thing and we'll move on. Okay?